Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and for today's video I want to do one last discussion, and I promise this is going to be the last one unless something absolutely wild happens, which, to be fair, considering everything that has already happened around this movie, may not be completely outside the realm of possibility, around the 13 Oscar-nominated movie Emilia, Pérez, as well as, more specifically, the discourse that has come out around the movie and the events that have transpired around the movie after the recent revelation earlier this week that the star of the film, transgender actress and Best Picture nominee Carla Sofia Gascon had posted numerous vile, racist, Islamophobic, and other offensive tweets on the artist formerly known as Twitter over the past few years, leading to her to be basically removed from the movie's Oscar campaign by Netflix. And the reason that I want to talk about this discourse is not to harp on Gascon again, because I've already discussed not only the racism and transphobia of Emilia Pérez in a video over on my main channel, as well as Gascon's vile tweets in a video that I posted on this channel earlier this week, but more to talk about how this discourse has ultimately underscored a much larger issue and problem surrounding the trans misogyny that has underscored not only this film, but is also a larger problem of the entire discourse around trans people and trans women specifically, that this is just a perfect example of. So while I am going to be talking about this situation, I actually want to use it as an exemplar of a much larger and more prevalent dynamic that we need to start discussing more and more openly. But to quick recap everything that has gone on for all of you, Emilia Pérez is a French film about a Mexican cartel drug dealer who comes out as transgender. And it's also a musical for some reason.
Man to woman.
From penis to vagina.
The movie faced a ton of criticism, not only from the trans community for being deeply transphobic and propping up ingrained tropes and assumptions and biases and narratives that are weaponized against the trans community, even despite the movie supposedly being a complex, interesting, and ultimately humanizing portrayal of trans people, which it's not, but has also faced a ton of criticism from Mexican folks for its racist depiction of Mexico. Yet despite this, the movie was nominated for 13 Oscars because it is a perfect example of the tokenizing way that Hollywood and progressive types generally like to point at how they're uplifting the marginalized communities without actually doing anything to understand the marginalized experience or to actually help marginalized people, but just instead pat themselves on the back for saying, hey, look, we platformed a trans person, even though the movie is super transphobic, as well as ignoring people of color generally and upholding the white supremacy of systems that are ingrained in stuff like Hollywood or America generally, a la Crash or The Green Book or Driving Miss Daisy. These 13 Oscar nominations got the movie a ton of backlash, and yet despite this, the movie still seemed on track to be the front runner to win Best Picture, and it's deeply angering because in a year where there have been numerous movies by transgender creators that are better at showcasing transgender experience and a transgender perspective, like things like I Saw the TV Glow, as well as an era where trans people are facing numerous direct attacks from a growing fascistic government in the United States, they still just want to prop up this piece of shit racist film that supposedly is about us, but actually pushes a lot of the transphobic narratives that many people believe around us, and specifically around trans women. And all of this is stuff I talk about in greater detail in my video on my main channel. However, its Best Picture frontrunner status came into question earlier this week, as I said, after it was revealed that Gascon had posted numerous vile racist posts on Twitter. You can go check out my other video. They're absolutely horrific and terrible. And I want to be very clear here, she deserves every piece of criticism for those posts. They are absolutely gross, disgusting, and vile, and some of them are actively genocidal. However, since then, Gascon has made numerous posts, gone on numerous different shows, pushing back against the fact that she's supposedly racist, seemingly going rogue from Netflix's promotional team, because all of these appearances are absolutely terrible. She's done things like saying, oh, I'm not racist, the people attacking me are just transphobic and trying to attack a trans woman. And even going so far as to say things basically like, oh, I can't be racist because I know a black person. Saying things like, well, if I was racist, would I have been in a movie with Zoe Saldana? It kind of gives the energy of like, oh, well, I didn't say the N-word to her while we were on set, so of course I can't be racist. It's a very, very weird way to try to defend yourself. And ultimately led to her posting, I believe on Instagram, where she said, I refuse to apologize for anything. I've done nothing wrong, doubling down on everything and refusing to accept any accountability or any acknowledgement of the racism of her tweets. And all of that speaks to stuff that I talked about earlier, right? That she is clearly a trans woman with a lot of privilege and is someone who is basically inculcated from a lot of the attacks on trans people going on right now because of her class. She's a woman with a decent amount of money, it seems to have already gone through her transition, is able to generally pass in society, and has access to a lot of things that would sort of prevent her from being in danger from a lot of the attacks on trans people right now, especially considering she's also not from the United States. And it gives a lot of weird echoes of TERFs, weirdly enough, because TERFs are, for the most part, upper-class white cisgender women who are willing to push down trans women because they are more aligned with their class and patriarchy because they get some benefit from it and are unwilling to destabilize their sense of comfort even while they are harmed by these systems, and instead attack the people that they see as destabilizing the status quo. They may not recognize it as that, but it is the same basic things. Like, they would rather attack trans women instead of understanding that cis and trans women should be working together to fight back against white supremacy and patriarchy. Gascon does the same exact thing. She's willing to push down people of color. She's willing to take on the mantle of being the voice for trans people while pushing down trans people of less economic means, less access, promoting narratives that hurt, especially trans people who don't have access to the same institutional support that she has. And it all just goes to show how class ultimately is one of the biggest things that people align with, that they are always willing to align more with their class position than they are with their potentially marginalized status, especially if they are white or white passing. However, while all of that is very interesting, and I definitely wanted to make sure I talked about it, the thing that I really want to hone in here is on the trans misogyny surrounding the response to Gascon's racism. Because what this has all ultimately led to is Netflix removing Gascon from their Oscar campaign for the film, and yet still pushing the film anyways. So they're not pushing her for Best Actress. They released posters that have removed her from the poster, as well as never mentioned that the movie has gotten a Best Actress nomination. And yet they're still pushing for Zoe Saldana to get a Best Supporting Actress nomination, as well as the movie to win Best Picture, as well as all the other Oscars that they are nominated for. On top of that, though, this event around Gascon was the first time that it seemed that the movie had started to lose steam as the front runner for winning Best Picture. And that, to me, is extremely, extremely telling. Because before anything with Gascon happened, people had been pointing out the racism and transphobia of the film for weeks, if not months. And even after the Best Picture nominations, even with people talking about all these things, the movie still seemed like it was on track to win Best Picture. In fact, there has been some discourse surrounding the fact that this stuff around Gascon might even make the movie more likely to win the Best Picture nomination, because Oscar voters may pity the film and pity the situation that it's in because of Gascon and give the movie Oscars anyways. I think that narrative has already started to build surrounding Zoe Saldana, who also won an award for the film a few days ago and even cried at the event.
I didn't have anything prepared, you guys. I wasn't expecting this, and especially now.
And so there's already been this discourse around the fact that, oh, maybe they will give Zoe Saldana the award because she so clearly deserves it, because she's the best part of the movie, and it's not her fault that Gascon was a piece of shit. Which, to be fair, it is not her fault that Gascon is a piece of shit, but I don't believe she deserves the Oscar because this movie is absolutely awful. But that narrative might also push out to the rest of the film, and might get the director of the movie, Jacques Audiard, the Oscar for Best Picture, which is absolutely infuriating because he's the one, not Zoe Saldana, not Gascon, not Selena Gomez, who made a movie that is absolutely transphobic and racist. He is the one who made it, and yet no one is criticizing him. Instead, we're out here criticizing Gascon over and over again, understandably so, she deserves it. Or folks like Selena Gomez, who got a lot of flack for her accent in the movie, something that she has clearly spoken about being embarrassed about because she didn't get enough support from Audiard to have enough time to make sure she got the accent right.
I'm not as happy with what I feel like I could have done in Spanish, but overall, I hope that it doesn't hinder my performance, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Perhaps I could have had more time with it.
Clearly, yes, she deserves criticism for her accent. It's not good. It's really terrible in the movie. But I put that problem not just on her, but on the director for A, casting her on the movie and not understanding how bad her accent would be, and B, even after casting her, not giving her the support to make sure she could be able to get it as well right as she could. And it just goes to show how institutions like Hollywood or America generally are willing to ignore racism and transphobia because they're the assumptions that these institutions are built off of. And movies like Emilia Pérez don't challenge any of those assumptions. They don't challenge people's views of Mexicans, and they don't challenge people's views of trans people. Whereas movies made by actual Mexican folks and movies made by actual trans folks actually do that. Things like I Saw the TV Glow are sometimes impenetrable to cisgender audiences, despite them not being overtly transgender, because it's a movie that is speaking to a transgender experience that is often vilified and often misunderstood. A lot of people say I Saw the TV Glow is about the dangers of nostalgia, when it's a movie not about that. It's a movie about choosing your own heart, about an urgent plea for people to see themselves. In fact, there were reports of people even yelling slurs at I Saw the TV Glow in theaters. That's an extreme example, but for the most part, the bigger problem is just people not getting I Saw the TV Glow, which is wild considering how overt it is in many cases. And yet those movies challenge people to think differently about the world and to think differently about other people, see yourself in the other, to understand a trans experience and recognize that, hey, that experience that many trans people feel isn't so different from yours. But instead, they'd rather prop up movies like Emilia Pérez, which showcase transgender people as other, as different, as something to gawk at, as something to be pitied or looked down upon, or something to be seen as like, oh, our trans people may be lying to you. That ingrained in something that trans people may be liars. Again, more transphobia and especially trans misogyny there. In fact, to be clear, it is trans misogyny because trans men definitely face their own issues. But the narrative around trans men is that they're just women who have been tricked into becoming trans, who are been tricked, and that we can reclaim trans men, bring them back, and try to save their reproductive organs for the most part. Again, that sort of white supremacy, we need to breed as many people as possible nonsense. Whereas it's trans women who are the ones seen as lying, as manipulators, as vilified. Again, it speaks to all of the ingrained patriarchy and white supremacy of all of it, right? That trans men are just seen as women who have been objectified and therefore can just be reclaimed. They're lost, they're infantilized, they don't really understand what they're doing. Whereas trans women, especially trans white women, are people who have seemingly given up being a white man, the best thing you can be in our society. And thereby you are in active defiance of the hierarchical system that is upheld by all of these things. And thereby trans women are more likely to be actively vilified and actively violently attacked. Again, both narratives have their problems and harm, but the idea that trans people are manipulators, that are lying, are dangerous, are villains, are actively violent, are male socialized, is a narrative specifically wielded against trans women, where trans men are seen as infantilized. Which brings me back to Gascon, because Gascon, revealed to be an absolute vile racist, was the thing that started to get people to start to question whether or not Emilia Pérez should be the frontrunner for Best Picture. Not the racism, not the transphobia, but one trans woman being absolutely a piece of shit. And again, it speaks to the fact that it is reinforcing all the ingrained assumptions around trans people, and trans women specifically. I have seen so many videos by cisgender creators talking about Gascon saying, well, this is just evidence of her male socialization. This is just evidence that she's kind of still a man deep down. She's talking like a dude. And I've seen even more vile videos by even more right-winger folks that attack her identity as a woman. And it goes to something that I spoke about way back in my initial video on Emilia Pérez, about how these systems will do anything they can to try to take trans women's womanhood from us if we don't fit the exact narrative that they want us to fit. They are willing to nominally accept us if we follow the straight and rigid path of being the token, the one who doesn't speak up too much, the one who doesn't rock the boat. They're willing to accept us as women if we follow that narrow path. But if we either speak up against the transphobia that they produce, like someone like me is doing, or if we turn out to be vile racists or horrid people like Gascon, our womanhood and identity is taken away from us instantaneously, like that. And it also speaks to how capitalist systems like to create a tokenized version of something to sell as a commodity, as a product. Gascon and Emilia Pérez is a movie that was sold as like a transgender film. It was sort of meant to elevate, like, here, if you want to support trans people, support this movie. Just give money or give awards to this movie if you want to support trans people. Don't actually go out and help trans people. Go and stand up. Don't stand up for us in terms of, like, protesting, speaking up against the legislation being wielded against us or the violent attacks against us. No, just pay money to support this movie. And support Gascon specifically as a representative of all of trans people, not trans people generally, or artists like Jane Schoenbrunn, the director of I Saw the TV Glow, who are trying to promote more empathy for trans people through their work. No, just promote the glorification of one creator. And when that creator or that film turns out to not be good or not fit that definition, well, then we can just toss it out and say, well, we're not actually going to support them anyways. Because I can almost guarantee you that this situation around Gascon will lead to a chilling effect around getting more trans people nominated in the future at the Oscars. I bet people are going to look at Gascon, and if they want to nominate another trans actress in a few years and go, that turned out real bad. Trans women, they tend to be very very violent and vitriolic and racist, don't they? We don't want to have that situation again. So let's not really do that. It'll create an if it's not an overt thought, it will create an ingrained thought in people. And that's not to say that there might not be trans women or people, other trans people who get nominated in the future, but it will cause that chilling effect. Gascon deserves all of the criticism targeted at her for her racism, and yet she is now also an exemplar of all of trans people and is going to be wielded as such, even if not explicitly so, because she is the most prominent trans woman now. It speaks to this white supremacist system that elevates members of a marginalized community to celebrity and then uses our flaws to label us all as problematic and unworthy of the attention of the system that bestowed that attention on us in the first place. Which, by the way, was a point pointed out by Desi, someone who responded to me on Blue Sky, but I agree wholeheartedly with that point. And the trans misogyny of this is even more obvious when you recognize how Gascon has been removed rightfully from this Oscar campaign. And yet when other cis white dudes do something similar, they still get allowed to go to the Oscars. I mean, look at someone like Mel Gibson. He's someone who has stated numerous anti-Semitic and other offensive things, and is literally even the Hollywood ambassador to the Trump administration, I guess now is a thing that he's doing. And yet, he has been invited back to the Oscars numerous times and was even up for several Oscars. And yet, when Gascon, a trans woman, says horrific racist things, she gets immediately a ton of not only criticism, but harassment, and is instantly removed from the campaign. And it's not to say that Gascon shouldn't be removed from the campaign, it's just to point out the hypocrisy here. And also to point out she shouldn't be getting any of the harassment either. Like, that should be abjectly clear. But again, she's a trans woman. She's getting harassment regardless of whether she was an absolute vile racist. And I'm sure this is just being used to justify even more of it. And people aren't willing to push back against it because they don't want to be seen as defending Gascon. And at the end of the day, like, trans people don't need the Oscars. We are used to systems not supporting us, but it sucks because, you know, this could have been a great opportunity to promote something like I Saw the TV Glow, to have Jane Schoenbrunn get that attention that actually push back against the narratives around trans people through mainstream pop culture entertainment. Wouldn't have changed the world, but it would have been a nudge in that direction. That would have actually been helpful. This has actually done nothing but harm the trans community and just showcased to me the underlying trans misogyny of all of this. But again, as I spoke about with Emilia Pérez, the film, and its nomination in my main video, this ultimately just underscores the larger problem that we are facing right now as trans people. The ineffectiveness of supposedly progressive liberals to do anything to actually help us. I've been looking over the past few weeks as people like Jon Stewart or establishment Democrats, or hell, even my fiance's own freaking family, say they want to support us, and yet say we're the ones playing the victim card. We're the ones being hysterical when Trump literally attacks our ability to leave the country with passports, is isolating us, vilifying us, and trying to make it easier for us to scapegoat from the larger community. And the way that that is enabled is by people not actually standing up for trans people, not understanding our narratives, and instead vilifying us for speaking up, even on supposedly the progressive sides. It's why I've been harping on this so much, because, and I want to be very clear about this, like, fascists are worse. They are actively attacking transgender people. But we understand that dynamic. Most people understand that dynamic of like, hey, fascists are attacking trans people. The larger problem that we need to address and face right now is the ingrained transphobia and trans misogyny of people who say they want to support us, but are not willing to address the underlying core assumptions around trans people that they have ingrained in themselves. That we are, especially trans women, that we are, violent, vitriolic, playing the victim, overly hysterical, male socialized, or biological men deep down. We actually have advantages against women in sports, cis women in sports. Like, that's the larger issue that we face. And that's why I've been harping on it. Not because it's the larger danger. The danger comes from the fascists. But that danger is enabled and allowed to happen because of this dynamic. And it's the one that we have the ability to try to push back the most against through education, through getting people to understand us, and to getting people to understand what it means to be a trans person. But that can only happen if people are willing to challenge their assumptions, which shit like Emilia Pérez is not willing to do. All that being said, I want to leave you with this last, I want to say funny thing. I guess it's more ironic, which is, if you go back and watch my video on Emilia Pérez on my main channel where I discussed the film, I spoke about a movie that I would have liked to see more than Emilia Pérez. And saying that that would have been a more truthful depiction of a shitty trans person, if you wanted to make a movie about a trans person being shitty but while also still humanizing us, honestly, if you listen to it, it's a perfect description of the situation with Carla Sofia Gascon. So I'm going to replay that clip at the end of this video just to have you listen to it and be like, wow, it's almost like I predicted this, that how trans women of certain privilege do certain things. Anyways, I'll leave you with that, but for now, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper. In a better movie, this could have been a great turning point where Emilia confronted the repercussions of her violent past. What if families of her victims that she is currently helping discovered that Emilia was the one responsible for their loved ones' deaths? And if the film wanted to explore transness within that, perhaps these families, while rightfully angry, weaponized transphobia against her out of anger, forcing Emilia to grapple with both her actions and the bigotry that she now faces as a trans woman. It could have been a really nuanced narrative about accountability, transness, and how patriarchal cis-heteronormative societies entice men to violence and then absolve them until they're marginalized. Imagine a version of Emilia's story where she's forced to rightfully take account for her violent past, but only does so because her history was discovered after she acted on guilt that she can now fully feel. A guilt which only emerges because she lives in an identity that society allows her to be more in touch with her emotions within. And at the same time, she would have had to navigate that accountability in a world that not only holds her to a different trans-misogynistic standard, but is also deeply hostile to her very existence as a trans woman. Hell, you could have even gone wild with it and talked about how trans women often tend to be the victims of cartel violence, meaning that she could have actually faced violence as a trans woman by the very people that she used to pal around with as a dude. That would have been such a wildly interesting and cool storyline to explore. But sadly, that's not what we get.